They called her a servant, a shadow in the kitchen, a woman whose name was meant to vanish with the smoke of the hearth. But history remembers what silence tries to bury. One night, in the dim glow of Charleston's old manors, a woman named Hannah stirred more than food. She stirred fate itself. With hands once bound by obedience, she mixed not only poison, but prophecy. That single act did not end a life. It awakened a nation's sleeping soul. Her rebellion was not written in fire or trumpet sound. It was written in silence, in the soft clatter of a spoon against a bowl, in the heartbeat of a woman who dared to say, "Enough." Beneath the smoke of the Charleston kitchen, where iron pots simmered with broth and human exhaustion mingled with the scent of herbs, there lived a silence heavier than words. It was in this silence that Hannah existed, a woman defined not by freedom, but by service, her every movement dictated by the invisible chains of expectation and fear. The kitchen was her kingdom and her prison, a place where life and death were constantly transmuted, where hunger was satisfied, bodies were nourished, and yet, behind the act of feeding, a deeper hunger grew. It was the hunger for autonomy, for meaning, for recognition that the hands which cooked could also command destiny. The act of stirring a pot became an unconscious meditation on power. Every spoonful tasted of submission, and every serving became an unspoken ritual of obedience. But beneath that rhythm of servitude, something ancient stirred, something that could not forever be buried beneath the weight of daily routine. That something was the shadow, the repressed side of the human soul that refuses to die even when beaten, silenced, and enslaved. Hannah's shadow did not emerge suddenly. It grew slowly, like a secret vine wrapping itself around her soul. It began with resentment, then deepened into awareness, and finally crystallized into purpose. She was the one who knew her master's tastes, their weaknesses, their indulgences, the intimate details of their existence that they themselves took for granted. They trusted her, as the oppressor often trusts the obedient servant, blind to the truth that those who serve learn to see more clearly than those who command. Every day she stood at the boundary between submission and power. The tools of her labor, spoons, knives, fire, were also instruments of potential transformation. And somewhere within that silent realization, the line blurred between kitchen work and alchemy. She began to understand that what was expected of her, the making of sustenance, could also be turned into an act of rebellion. What was nourishment could become poison. What was servitude could become sovereignty. In the deepest layer of her psyche, Hannah faced the archetypal confrontation between the oppressed and the oppressor, between the persona she was forced to wear and the authentic self she had buried to survive. The persona smiled, bowed, and obeyed, but the self, her truer being, burned in secret with the memory of ancestral pain. She had inherited not only the physical bondage of slavery, but also the psychic inheritance of generations who had learned to bury their pain under docility. Yet, in every generation, there exists one who becomes the mirror for the collective shadow, one who dares to make visible what others can only feel. Hannah was that mirror. Her body moved through the motions of service, but her spirit observed, calculated, and remembered. In the eyes of her masters, she was invisible. In the eyes of her ancestors, she was chosen. The kitchen became a crucible for transformation. It was not merely a place of heat and food, it was a place where energy shifted form. Within that confined space, where she labored in silence, Hannah began to perceive her own symbolic power. Fire could burn, water could cleanse, herbs could heal, but each could also destroy. These were not just materials of cooking, they were elements of creation and destruction alike. And when the moment came, when her shadow at last rose to meet the surface, it did not do so as rage alone, but as revelation. The poison she prepared was not an act of madness, but of awakening. It was the shadow's first breath after centuries of suffocation. In that one gesture, Hannah's inner and outer worlds collided, the world that enslaved her and the inner realm that sought balance. The poison was, in a deeper sense, a symbol rather than a substance. It represented the inversion of power, the reclaiming of agency through the very means by which oppression had thrived. The same hands that once served the oppressors now held their fate. Her rebellion was not a loud cry or a violent uprising. It was a whisper in the language of the unconscious, subtle and deliberate, like the movement of fate itself. To outsiders, it might have appeared an act of vengeance, but to the psyche, it was an archetypal balancing act, a restoration of cosmic order where human systems had failed. The poison did not only flow into the masters' bodies, it seeped into the moral structure of Charleston, corroding the illusion of invulnerability that sustained the slave-holding world. To understand Hannah's shadow is to understand that darkness is not inherently evil. It is the realm of what has been denied, suppressed, and forgotten. Her darkness was born from injustice, from the centuries-long repression of identity, dignity, and voice. The moment she allowed that shadow to act, she was not embracing wickedness but releasing truth. Her act became a psychological rite of passage, a movement from unconscious suffering to conscious defiance. In that single act, she integrated the two halves of her being, the obedient cook and the silent revolutionary. The kitchen fire became a mirror of the fire within her, consuming the illusions of passivity. The rattling pots became the drums of revolt, echoing through the walls of the house, through the city, and through history itself. Hannah's story is the eternal story of the human soul confronting its shadow. Every society that builds itself upon domination eventually gives birth to its own destroyer, not from outside, but from within. The cook who fed her masters with care also carried within her the suppressed hunger for justice. When she finally acted, she did not destroy something alien. She revealed what was already dying, the moral sickness of a system built on dehumanization. The act of poisoning thus became both literal and symbolic. Literal in its physical consequences, symbolic in its exposure of truth. She did not merely kill, she unveiled. And yet, her rebellion was not about hatred. Hatred is too small a vessel for such vast transformation. What moved her was a force older than revenge, a demand for equilibrium, an instinctual return to harmony where power had grown distorted. In that sense, the poison was a kind of purification, a violent but necessary reordering of the moral landscape. The very same kitchen that had once been a stage for servitude became the altar of reckoning. And in that moment, Hannah, the cook of Charleston, ceased to be a servant in any sense of the word. She became an instrument of destiny, the embodiment of the truth that what humanity represses will one day rise, take form, and act through the least expected vessel. There is a power within every act of creation that cannot be contained by the limits of ordinary understanding, and in Hannah, this power found a vessel that neither time nor fear could silence. Her hands, once symbols of service, became the instruments of an ancient and unnameable energy, the fiery spirit of the feminine that both gives life and brings transformation. For too long, she had been defined by the narrow confines of the kitchen, a place where the feminine was domesticated, tamed, and bound to nurture the very system that enslaved her. Yet beneath that role burned a deeper fire, one that remembered what it meant to be whole. Every stir of the spoon, every taste of the broth, was a ritual unconsciously repeated across centuries, echoing the primordial rhythm of creation itself. In this sacred space of heat, labor, and endurance, Hannah's soul began to awaken to its dual nature. The nurturer within her could no longer exist without the destroyer. The healer could no longer deny the avenger. Her defiance was not born from cruelty, but from the alchemy of transformation, the realization that the same energy that gives sustenance can also reclaim justice. The fire that glowed beneath her pots was not only the fire of survival, but the fire of awakening. Within it, she recognized herself as part of something vast and eternal, a living manifestation of a force that exists in every woman silenced by history. Her rebellion did not begin with poison, but with awareness, the subtle knowing that her body was more than a tool for labor. It was a channel for the unspoken will of generations. The flames whispered to her as she worked, telling her that her pain was not hers alone, but the echo of countless women who had been buried under obedience. She was the mother who had lost her child to the auction block, the lover who had been separated from her beloved, the midwife who had brought life into a world that denied its humanity. All of them lived within her, speaking through her as she prepared each meal, and in their chorus, the fire found its purpose. In the mythology of the human spirit, fire has always stood as the symbol of the divine feminine's transformative nature. The power to burn away illusion, to purify, to renew. Hannah's fire became exactly that, a living emblem of the unseen revolution taking root within her. While the world around her demanded silence, her inner world roared with awakening. The kitchen, once a symbol of containment, became her temple. The cauldron, her altar, the act of cooking, her ritual of empowerment. And when she chose to turn the act of nourishment into one of rebellion, she was not merely rejecting her role, she was transcending it. She became both priestess and warrior, offering her defiance as a sacred act. The moment she infused the meal with her decision, the boundaries between servitude and sovereignty dissolved, and the fire that had warmed her captors' meals became the same fire that consumed their illusion of safety. Her defiance was a return to the forgotten truth that the feminine spirit is not passive. It is cyclical, creative, and destructive all at once. For centuries, she and others like her had been told that obedience was virtue, that gentleness was divine, and that endurance was the highest form of grace. Yet deep within the hidden core of her being, another truth burned, the truth that divinity itself is fierce when denied. Her rebellion, then, was the re-emergence of a forgotten archetype, the mother who defends, the goddess who purifies through fire, the healer who knows when destruction is the final form of healing. When she lifted her eyes from the stove, they no longer saw the tools of her bondage. They saw the symbols of her reclamation. The knife, once meant to prepare food, now gleamed with the clarity of purpose. The spoon, once used to serve others, became the instrument through which destiny would be stirred. This was not the rebellion of anger alone, it was the uprising of spirit. Hannah's defiance was the embodiment of every suppressed feminine force yearning for expression. The world that enslaved her had mistaken her gentleness for weakness, her silence for consent, her nurturing for compliance. But beneath those layers of misunderstanding, her spirit had been quietly gathering strength. The feminine does not strike impulsively. It waits, watches, and transforms in silence until the moment arrives. When that moment came, it was inevitable, an eruption of truth long prepared by centuries of endurance. The fire that had once been her burden became her language. It spoke of balance, of the universal need for restoration. It burned not only for revenge, but for awakening, the kind of awakening that restores dignity to the soul and reminds the oppressor that even beneath the most submissive exterior lies the potential for divine reckoning. Through Hannah's act, the world witnessed a rare fusion of grace and fury, compassion and power. She embodied the paradox of creation, that true nurturing cannot exist in a world that denies justice, and true justice cannot emerge without acknowledging the sacredness of the life that sustains it. In the end, the fire within her transcended her name, her status, and her time. It became the eternal flame of resistance, a spiritual inheritance for all who live in silence but burn within. Her defiance was the living testament that the feminine spirit, when pushed to its edge, transforms from servant to sovereign, from caretaker to catalyst, from silence to storm. The moment the fire of the feminine awakened in Hannah, the world shifted, even if the change was invisible at first. For every act of rebellion begins within, in the quiet decision to no longer conform to the lie of powerlessness. Her defiance illuminated the truth that the feminine essence, be it in woman, man, or collective spirit, is not merely to serve, but to transform. Through her, the eternal flame found voice again, whispering that to feed is sacred, but to awaken through fire is divine. Poison in its truest sense is not only a substance that brings death, it is a mirror held up to the nature of transformation itself. It carries within it the paradox of life and death, creation and destruction, healing and decay. In the mythology of human consciousness, poison often emerges as the forbidden knowledge that destroys innocence but grants awareness. For Hannah, the cook of Charleston, the poison she prepared was not merely a liquid meant to still a heartbeat. It was the physical embodiment of an inner evolution that had reached its inevitable end. Every drop carried the weight of centuries of silence, each molecule vibrating with the memory of pain, humiliation, and endurance. It was the unconscious will of the oppressed taking form, choosing the most intimate of methods to speak its truth. The spoon that had once nourished now became the vehicle of awakening. The act was both literal and metaphysical, a bridge between the visible and invisible, between the world of submission and the world of self-realization. The poison was a language, one that spoke in the dialect of consequence. It was the whisper of divine balance in a society that had long abandoned it. For Hannah, to poison was not to hate, but to reveal. She had lived in a world where justice had no voice, where the laws of men and gods alike seemed to favor cruelty. Yet within her, a deeper law persisted, one that no human decree could silence. That law demanded equilibrium. It demanded that suffering return to its source, that the moral imbalance be righted, not through rhetoric or negotiation, but through action that spoke from the very core of existence. In preparing the poison, Hannah was not inventing evil. She was acknowledging it. She was naming what had been hidden, embodying the darkness that the world around her refused to see. The very notion of poison challenges human morality. It forces one to confront the uncomfortable truth that transformation often requires destruction. In the natural world, poison both protects and heals. The venom of a serpent can kill, but it can also be refined into medicine. Likewise, Hannah's act straddled that line. Her poison was not simply an end, it was a catalyst. It brought death, yes, but it also forced the living to see. The oppressors who had built their comfort on her labor were suddenly made fragile, their bodies as vulnerable as the ones they had chained. Through her act, she dismantled the illusion of invulnerability. Her poison dissolved more than flesh. It eroded the myth of supremacy, the belief that those who rule cannot fall. In that dissolution, something new was born, a crack in the structure of oppression through which consciousness could enter. To understand the depth of her act, one must look beyond morality and into the realm of symbol. Poison has always been a sacred element in human myth, a tool of the gods and the prophets who bring forth transformation through suffering. In ancient stories, those who drink poison do not merely die. They are initiated into wisdom. The bitter taste opens the soul to revelation. When Hannah stirred her mixture, she became the unconscious priestess of this ritual, initiating not herself, but her world into its own reckoning. The poison was the sacrament of justice, the bitter communion through which a diseased society would finally confront its own corruption. Each drop was a reminder that even in silence, power accumulates, and that when it is released, it strikes with the inevitability of fate. There was nothing random in her action. Every movement was guided by an inner necessity that transcended logic or fear. She had no army, no weapon, no allies beyond the forces that live unseen within the psyche. Her rebellion was chemical, spiritual, and symbolic all at once. She did not fight with swords, she fought with transformation, and the poison, being both invisible and irreversible, reflected the very nature of truth itself. Once revealed, it cannot be taken back. The moment her masters tasted it, the boundary between oppressor and oppressed dissolved. They were joined by the same substance, bound in the same fate, swallowed by the same invisible agent of destiny. Through this act, Hannah equalized existence. She made them share the vulnerability that had defined her life. In that moment, poison became not a weapon of vengeance, but a form of purification. It was the unconscious correcting the corruption of the conscious world. It was the psychic immune response of a civilization sickened by its own arrogance. The poison entered not only their blood, but the bloodstream of history, forcing those who came after to question, to awaken, to feel. Her act became the shadow that every oppressor must face, the haunting knowledge that no domination lasts forever. Every system that feeds upon others eventually consumes itself, and Hannah's poison was the symbolic beginning of that self-consumption. She became the vessel through which the law of balance returned to the earth, the reminder that what is denied in the light will rise in the dark to claim its due. There is also within poison a deep psychological truth. What one refuses to acknowledge inwardly must eventually manifest outwardly. Hannah had lived too long swallowing bitterness, suppressing her truth to survive. Her very body became an alchemical chamber where injustice was metabolized into defiance. The poison was not brewed in hatred, but in necessity. It was the overflow of psychic energy that could no longer be contained. In a way, she did not create it. It created itself through her. The hands that stirred the mixture were guided by the invisible movement of history itself, the accumulated will of those who had suffered before her. She was simply the moment of release, the point at which centuries of silence crystallized into a single decisive act. The transformation did not end with death. The poison's true purpose was revelation. It forced both victim and witness to see beyond illusion, to see that control is fragile, that the oppressed hold power in forms the powerful cannot perceive. Hannah's act became the mythic turning point in a long, unseen war between conscience and denial. Through her, poison became prophecy. It declared that no matter how deeply truth is buried, it will find a vessel, it will take form, and it will speak in a language that cannot be ignored. Thus, poison, in Hannah's hands, ceased to be merely a weapon. It became the voice of the silent, the shadow of divine justice moving through human history, and the symbol of transformation that arises only when the soul has been pushed to its final threshold. Every act of rebellion begins first, as a whisper in the collective dream. It does not come from one person alone, but from the slow gathering of unseen forces, the unspoken desires and pains that dwell in the hearts of many. Hannah was not just one woman in a Charleston kitchen. She was the dream-made flesh of an entire people whose cries had long been buried beneath the weight of silence. Her mind carried not only her own memories, but the echo of generations who had lived and died in chains. The pulse of their suffering moved through her veins like a forgotten song, And the moment she chose to act, that song found its rhythm again. The collective unconscious, that vast realm where the memories of all souls intertwine, stirred through her and found expression in her defiance. Hannah became the bridge between the visible and the invisible, between the centuries of despair and the birth of new consciousness. Her body was a vessel, her act a message, her courage the manifestation of a dream that was not hers alone but shared by all who had endured the darkness of bondage. The collective dream of the enslaved is not one of mere escape. It is the longing for wholeness. Every soul that suffers under oppression dreams of returning to the state of balance, where human dignity is no longer divided by color, status, or power. But such dreams cannot remain abstract. They need a form, a body through which to awaken the sleeping world. Hannah became that form, not because she sought glory or vengeance, but because the current of history flowed through her with such intensity that resistance became as natural as breath. Her act of rebellion, though small in appearance, was immense in meaning. It was the awakening of a collective psyche that had for centuries been taught to sleep. In her silence, her careful steps, her steady hands mixing the fateful meal, there was more than planning. There was invocation. She was calling forth the ancestral spirits, summoning the strength of the forgotten, channeling the wisdom of those who had endured humiliation with unbroken souls. Within every society, there exists a deep undercurrent, a dream shared by the oppressed that moves like water beneath stone, unseen but unstoppable. It carries within it the will to restore balance to a fractured world. The oppressors build their walls of power higher, believing themselves secure, while beneath those walls, the current grows stronger. Hannah's kitchen was the place where that current finally broke through to the surface. The poison she stirred symbolized not only her defiance, but the eruption of that dream into reality. It was the point where centuries of silent endurance turned into action. The collective unconscious of the enslaved, long repressed and denied expression, surged upward through her and spoke in the language of consequence. Her act was the dream's awakening, the transformation of suffering into awareness, the moment when the invisible finally claimed visibility. The collective dream is often carried by those least noticed, for power hides in humility. The masters saw only a cook, obedient, invisible, ordinary. Yet in that very invisibility lay her power. She could move unseen, listen without being feared, exist in spaces where the powerful relaxed their vigilance. But within that quiet presence lived the concentrated energy of 1,000 unspoken rebellions. The collective dream does not choose warriors with swords. It chooses vessels capable of holding the weight of transformation. Hannah was such a vessel. Her labor, her endurance, her silence, all had prepared her to hold that energy until the right moment. The dream used her hands to break the spell of submission. When she acted, it was not Hannah alone who moved, but the multitude of spirits who had waited in the dark for one heart brave enough to manifest their longing. There is an ancient truth within the human psyche that when suffering is collective, so too is liberation. The pain that binds one generation will, in time, become the fuel for another's awakening. Through Hannah, the dream of freedom that had drifted through countless souls took its first breath of life. The enslaved who heard of her act, whispered of her name in secret, felt something stir within them, a recognition that their own despair could one day transform into defiance. Her rebellion was not just an event, it was a transmission of energy from the unconscious to the conscious, from the hidden dream to the waking world. Every whisper that followed her story became a seed of revolt planted in the minds of others. And in this way, the dream spread like fire, not through noise or chaos, but through the subtle awakening of self-recognition. Hannah's defiance showed that collective awakening does not begin with armies or speeches. It begins in the mind. When one individual embodies the truth of a people's pain, that truth multiplies, passing from one soul to another until it becomes unstoppable. The enslaved who once believed themselves powerless began to sense, even faintly, that they were connected to something vast and ancient. They began to dream differently. Their prayers changed, their silences deepened, their endurance gained new meaning. Even if they never took up arms, their consciousness had shifted. This was the revolution that began before any chains were broken, the revolution of the inner world, the reclaiming of the right to imagine freedom. The collective dream, once awakened, is impossible to contain. It does not end with the death of its messengers. It continues, morphing, adapting, living on in the memories and imaginations of those who remain. Hannah's act, though small in scale, resonated across the hidden geography of suffering. It became part of the mythic memory of her people, retold not as a tale of poison, but as a parable of courage. In those retellings, she was no longer merely a cook. She was the dreamer who dared to act, and through her myth, the dream itself gained immortality. The most profound revolutions are born not from politics, but from shared vision, from the collective yearning that unites the broken fragments of humanity into a single purpose. Hannah's rebellion was the awakening of that purpose, the moment when the dream of liberation crossed the threshold from imagination into being. It reminded the enslaved that freedom was not a distant fantasy, but a reality waiting to be claimed through courage. In her act, the collective dream of her people spoke at last, and through her, history itself turned its gaze toward the long-forgotten souls who had waited for someone to give their silence a voice. Freedom is a word woven with contradictions. It is sung about as pure, righteous, and holy, yet in reality it emerges from conflict, uncertainty, and moral unease. When Hannah chose to act, she entered this deep paradox, the moral ambiguity of liberation. In the rigid structure of her world, she had been taught that goodness was obedience, that virtue meant submission, that salvation came through endurance. Yet in the dark corners of her mind, something far older than any doctrine whispered a different truth. It told her that freedom, when pursued with pure heart, does not always appear gentle, that liberation, when long denied, often comes clothed in fury. When she poured the poison, she crossed not only the line between servant and master, but the line between what society called right and wrong. She did not act as saint or sinner, but as a soul burdened with the weight of necessity. In that moment, morality ceased to be a simple matter of law or commandment. It became a question of spirit, of survival, of truth born from pain. The world around her believed in order built upon oppression and called it peace. It sanctified cruelty through custom and named it divine will. In such a world, Hannah's act of rebellion was blasphemy, yet also revelation. She revealed the hypocrisy of a morality that demanded virtue only from the enslaved while excusing violence from the masters. Every lash of the whip, every sale of a child, every humiliation was justified under the same code that condemned her. When she poisoned her oppressors, she forced that code to confront its own reflection. Was her act evil? Or was it the mirror image of the evil she had endured for years? In that mirror, the society of Charleston saw itself stripped of pretense. Her act exposed the moral disease of the age, that people had mistaken domination for order and submission for grace. By daring to act, she shattered the illusion that morality belonged solely to the powerful. Hannah's decision carried within it both guilt and redemption, sin and sanctity. She was not free from inner torment. No human being ever is when they act beyond the boundaries of their world. In her solitude, she must have felt the tremor of fear, the voice that asks if one wrong can ever undo another. Yet beneath that voice lay a deeper certainty, born not of reason but of intuition. She understood that to end suffering, one must sometimes descend into its shadow. Every revolution walks this same path. It begins with righteousness, but it cannot remain pure, for purity is a luxury the oppressed cannot afford. Her act thus became the symbol of moral duality, the truth that liberation demands choices so heavy that they fracture the soul. But within that fracture lies the seed of awakening. Only by confronting the darkness within herself could Hannah glimpse the light of freedom. Her moral conflict reflects the eternal human struggle, the tension between law and conscience. The law of her world said she was property, incapable of moral agency. But her conscience, that voice beyond words, told her she was human, equal in worth to those who commanded her. In choosing to follow conscience over law, she reclaimed her humanity. And yet, the very act that affirmed her soul also stained her hands. This is the terrible beauty of liberation. It purifies through fire, not through peace. Every freedom won in history bears the mark of moral ambiguity. Saints and sinners often wear the same face. One judged by history as a monster may, in another age, be remembered as a prophet. Hannah stood at that crossroad, not seeking to be either, but simply to be free. There is a deeper lesson in her moral struggle, one that speaks to the heart of human evolution. True morality is not obedience but awareness. It is the recognition that sometimes the highest act of goodness appears, in the eyes of the world, as evil. Hannah's defiance forces us to ask, when the structures of power are built on injustice, what does it mean to be moral? To obey those structures is to participate in their cruelty. To resist them is to destroy the illusion of virtue. Thus, morality itself becomes a battlefield, and every act of rebellion becomes an act of redefinition. Hannah redefined what it meant to be righteous. Her poison was the blade that cut through hypocrisy, exposing the rotten core of false virtue that governed her world. The ambiguity of her liberation also lies in its aftermath. Freedom born from death is never clean. The act that ends oppression often carries the echoes of its own violence. For the survivors, freedom is haunted by memory, the remembrance of what was lost, the weight of what was done. Hannah's soul would have carried this burden, the knowledge that even justice can wound the one who delivers it. Yet it is this very burden that deepens the meaning of freedom. Liberation without moral struggle is shallow. It is the confrontation with guilt, the wrestling with conscience, that gives freedom its sacred weight. In that sense, Hannah's internal conflict was as revolutionary as her external act. It was the beginning of moral self-awareness among the oppressed, the recognition that they too possessed the right to choose, to err, to define the boundaries of their own virtue. Her moral ambiguity also reflects the transformation of collective consciousness. Those who heard of her deed would feel both fear and fascination, condemnation and awe. Some would whisper that she had gone too far, others that she had done what no one else dared, but in all their hearts, something subtle would shift. They would begin to question the fixed categories of good and evil that kept them bound. Through her act, morality became fluid again, alive, capable of growth. This was not the morality of dogma, but of awakening, the morality that arises when a soul faces the abyss and still chooses to act. The most profound truth of Hannah's story is that liberation is never pure. Every freedom carries the shadow of its birth, and every act of defiance is born from the collision of necessity and pain. Her poison was both justice and transgression, her rebellion both deliverance and burden. Yet in the complexity of that act lies its greatness. She was neither angel nor demon, but human, fully, painfully, magnificently human. And it is through such flawed acts that humanity evolves. By stepping beyond the boundaries of imposed virtue, Hannah awakened the moral imagination of her world. She showed that the path to freedom is not straight nor clean, but winding and filled with shadow. Yet it is within that shadow that the true light of consciousness is born. For only those who have faced moral ambiguity understand the cost of liberation and the sacred weight of being free. History does not remember Hannah as it remembers kings, generals, or ministers. It remembers her as an echo, a whisper that moved through the bones of Charleston and into the soul of a nation. Her story became more than a record of events. It became a symbol, a myth, a living metaphor of transformation. The psychological and cultural impact of her act reached beyond her lifetime, beyond the poisoned halls of her masters, and beyond the physical boundaries of slavery. It became a mirror in which society was forced to confront itself, and in that mirror the collective unconscious, silent, repressed, yet restless, stirred awake. For centuries, the oppressed had carried the burden of silent endurance, and the oppressors had carried the illusion of divine authority. Hannah shattered both illusions. Her act was not merely political, it was psychic. It pierced the unseen layer that binds human consciousness to its history of fear and dominance. In doing so, she awakened a shadow that had long been denied, a shadow that belonged to the entire civilization built upon bondage. The psychological weight of her defiance was immense. For those enslaved, she represented the eruption of buried anger that could no longer be suppressed. Her poison was not simply a weapon, it was the externalization of centuries of humiliation, grief, and silent rage. Every blow she or her kin had endured, every child torn from their mother's arms, every prayer unanswered by a silent God, all of it found form in that single act. Her rebellion was the embodiment of what lay dormant in the collective psyche of the enslaved, the desire not just for freedom, but for vengeance, for balance, for the restoration of dignity through fire. Yet in this eruption there was also creation. Just as a seed must break to sprout, the world of slavery had to fracture before a new consciousness could emerge. Hannah's act became that fracture, and through it, the buried self of an entire people began to breathe again. But every awakening in one soul summons fear in another. For the masters and those who benefited from the old order, Hannah became a living nightmare, the embodiment of guilt made flesh. Her defiance was the return of the repressed, the mirror of their cruelty reflected back upon them. They could no longer hide behind their scriptures, their economics, their polished manners. The poison she poured was also symbolic. It entered the bloodstream of the entire culture, infecting it with unease and self-doubt. The myth of moral superiority that sustained the institution of slavery began to rot from within. Fear spread not just of rebellion, but of moral contagion, of conscience itself awakening in the hearts of those who had silenced it. That was Hannah's greatest power. She forced even her enemies to feel the weight of their own darkness. Her act was not the end of slavery, but it was the beginning of its unraveling in the mind. For once, the illusion of righteousness is broken. No chain can hold forever. The cultural impact of her story took root in whispers and folklore. Among the enslaved, her name became a secret hymn, a tale told in hushed tones around fires, in songs disguised as prayers. She was remembered not as a killer, but as a symbol of forbidden courage. Her poison was reimagined as medicine, her defiance as prophecy. Even those who feared her act felt its strange holiness. It gave language to their pain and vision to their hope. It told them that freedom was not a gift to be granted, but a fire to be claimed. Over time, her legend grew into something larger than life, a figure both feared and revered, half woman, half spirit, who had dared to touch the sacred boundary between servitude and liberation, and with every retelling, her story fed the growing consciousness of resistance, preparing hearts for the revolutions to come. Yet her influence did not remain confined to the oppressed. The free world, too, began to change in the shadow of her act. Those who once justified slavery began to feel a creeping discomfort, a silent question gnawing at the edges of their belief. What if the system itself was cursed? The poison Hannah brewed seemed to spread through the moral bloodstream of society, transforming it from within. Artists, preachers, and thinkers began to reinterpret her story, not as simple vengeance, but as a symbolic reckoning. She became the embodiment of conscience breaking through centuries of denial. Her rebellion inspired sermons about sin and redemption, essays about justice and guilt, stories that blurred the line between punishment and purification. The image of a cook, a woman of humble status, standing at the center of such transformation, revealed a truth about humanity itself, that the smallest soul, when moved by truth, can ignite revolutions far beyond the scope of her own intention. In the deep psyche of the culture, Hannah became the archetype of the liberator shadow, the one who commits the forbidden act not out of malice, but to restore balance. Every society creates such figures, those who step into darkness so that light might return. For Charleston, she was that figure. She embodied the suppressed feminine power that patriarchy and slavery had sought to erase, the intuitive, moral, and transformative force that arises when injustice festers too long. Her rebellion was not logical, it was instinctive, elemental. It emerged from the same inner force that drives humanity toward wholeness. The old world labeled her wicked, but in truth she acted out what the entire civilization could not admit, that freedom demands confrontation, that peace requires reckoning. Her legacy rippled through generations. The women who followed, mothers, daughters, freedom seekers, carried within them a fragment of her spirit. Every small act of defiance, every whispered refusal to bow, became part of Hannah's invisible inheritance. Her story transformed from tragedy to myth, from myth to memory, and from memory to archetype. Even in silence, her presence lingered. She became the conscience of a people who could no longer unsee what she had revealed. Her act forced history to reckon not just with external systems of power, but with the inner structures that sustained them, the fear, the guilt, the denial. In the long arc of human evolution, Hannah's rebellion stands as a moment when darkness gave birth to awareness. Her poison was both literal and symbolic, a bitter draught that made an entire world confront its sickness. The transformation she sparked was not immediate, nor was it clean. It unfolded slowly, through centuries of struggle and remembrance, through the dreams and stories of those who carried her name like a secret talisman. Her act broke more than the chains of individuals. It broke the collective sleep of a civilization. And in that breaking, something ancient and necessary was reborn. The realization that even the humblest hand, moved by suffering and courage, can alter the course of consciousness itself. Hannah's story is not just a fragment of the past. It is the living pulse of humanity's eternal struggle between fear and freedom, guilt and grace, darkness and awakening. She was no saint, no villain. She was the embodiment of the soul's deepest cry to be seen, to be free, to reclaim the self from chains both visible and invisible. Through her defiance, she revealed that revolution is not born only on battlefields. It begins in the quiet chambers of the human heart, where pain ripens into courage. Her poison was not merely death, it was transformation, forcing the world to confront its shadow and awaken to its conscience. Every act of freedom since then carries a trace of her spirit, a reminder that the path to light runs through the valley of shadow. Hannah did not just spark rebellion. She taught the world that the truest liberation is not from the masters who bind us, but from the fear that tells us to remain silent. And when that fear dies, even the humblest soul can become a revolution,